Hey everyone, Miss Curdy here, and today we are going to be talking about topic 5-1, patterns for multiplication facts. And this note sheet is a little bit different. It's a little bit different because instead of a half sheet, we actually have a full sheet. So we're going to talk about how to analyze a multiplication table to figure out what pattern we see. And you might want to take out your notebook that has the review of those patterns and properties while you're working through this lesson in case you forget what some of the patterns are or forget what they mean. So have that handy just in case. So step one, when we're looking at a multiplication table, well, first off, in this topic, you're going to be given multiplication tables like this. They might be the whole multiplication that goes all the way up to factors 10 or 12. In this case, we're just looking at a small chunk of the multiplication table using factors 0 through 6 on both sides. So when you get these tables, you're going to notice that there's going to be some parts shaded in. You might see rows shaded in, you may see columns shaded in, or even on a diagonal. There may be just one row, you might have several rows that you'll need to analyze. So in this case, we've got this one row on a diagonal, this diagonal shaded in. So let's take a look. What we want to do is we want to look at those shaded products in the multiplication table and see what we have. Well, I'm noticing I have a 0, a 5, an 8, a 9, 8, 5, and 0. So when I look at those, I'm already starting to realize something. I've got 2 zeros, I've got 2 5s, and I have 2 8s, and then that 1 9. So that's got me thinking a little bit that I am noticing that. I don't know what it means yet, but I am seeing that so far. My next step is, because it's challenging to figure out the pattern by just looking at our products, we want to be able to look at all of the equations to see if we're noticing something. So my next step is I'm going to want to write those equations down that I see. So for this first one that equals 0, it's actually 6 times 0. Here I have 5 times 1. Here I have 4 times 2. 3 times 3 equals 9. 2 times 4 equals 8. 1 times 5 equals 5. And then 0 times 6 equals 0. So my next step is I want to analyze those equations. And analyze just means to look at them, start thinking about them, and start noticing what you're seeing within those equations. And our last step is, after I've analyzed, I want to think about what pattern do I notice when I look at their equations. Is there a property on there? Is there a property that you know of that matches these equations? So as I'm looking, I am noticing something within these equations. So if you want, take a moment to pause the video here, look at them yourself to see if you can find the pattern as well, or the property, and then write it down here, and we'll see if we get the same results. Go ahead and pause now. Okay, what I'm noticing here is in these two equations, I have 6 times 0 and 0 times 6. Then over here, I've got 4 times 2 and then 2 times 4. Here I have 1 times 5 and 5 times 1. In this case, 3 times 3, no matter what I do, would be the same equation. But I'm starting to notice that this looks a lot like the commutative property that tells me that regardless of the order of the product of the factors, I'll still get the same product. And that's what I'm noticing here, is that the equations have been switched, but we're still getting the same product. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the pattern I notice is the commutative property of multiplication. And I was starting to notice it up here when I was seeing that I was getting the same products over and over again, but it wasn't until I wrote out those equations and was able to see the whole picture that I was able to notice that pattern. All right, so please flip over your page to side 2. It's got the giant 2 at the top. And here we've got another pattern to look for. So step 1 is telling me to look at the shaded products for the 2's and the 3's. So here they've shaded in the products for 2 as a factor and 3 as a factor. Now step 2 is telling me to do something different. It's saying add those 2 shaded products in each row together. So I would need to add the 2, let me think about this, the 2 shaded products in each row together. For example, I would add the 2 plus the 3 together and get 5. And there are 7 rows, so you should add 7 pairs together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I know that 0 plus 0 is 0. 4 plus 6 here is going to give me 10. 6 plus 9 gives me 15. 8 and 12 gives me 20. 10 plus 15 gives me 25. And then 12 plus 18 gives me 30. All right, so I have those added up. Step 3, highlight the sums you just calculated. Highlight the sums I just calculated. So here are my sums, 5, 0, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. So now I'm going to highlight those. Shade the column that matches the list of sums that I just highlighted. So I didn't have a highlighter, so I circled them, and now I need to shade that column. So where do I see 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 20? Right. So there's that column. What connection do you notice between the original shaded columns and the columns you just shaded? Hint, think about the properties you've learned this year. So this one's pretty challenging. So I'm actually going to think about the other patterns that I have to see if I'm noticing something. So when I look at my pattern sheet, have this out and handy, I'm looking at the commutative property, and that tells me I can switch my factors around. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. We were adding some products together. The associative property is when I'm multiplying 3 or more numbers. That's not here. The distributive property is next on our list. So the distributive property tells us that the sum of 2 products would equal the sum of a larger product. Sorry, the sum of 2 smaller facts would equal the product of an original equation. So let me take a look. I'm going to start pulling out some equations. So here I've got 5 times 1, and the 2 that I had over here was a 2 times 1 and a 3 times 1. And I'm starting to notice that that 2 and that 3 bring me back to that 5. So I have 2 shaded products here. I've added those products together, and I'm getting a new product. And that sounds a lot like the distributive property. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. So whenever we're dealing with a multiplication table and they are showing you 2 columns and they're asking you to shade in a third or telling you to look at a third, be on the lookout for that being the distributive property. Again, it's our most complicated property we talk about, and therefore when we're looking at it in our multiplication chart, it is the most complicated. So you are going to notice that when you see 2 columns shaded and then a third column that off to the side is also shaded, oftentimes it is going to be the distributive property. Sometimes they'll ask you to do the adding and then the shading. Sometimes they'll give you all 3 columns shaded. So when you do see that, be on the lookout for the distributive property. And if you do get stuck, pull out those review notes and go through each one to see if it's a pattern you're noticing. Good luck on topic 5.1. Please take your time and use your review notes of patterns and properties to help you as you go through this. Sign up for a group lesson if you need it, and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you here next time.